Who cake, George Washington. While the aristocratic elite of 18th century Virginia were busy dining on imported British delicacies, Washington's morning started exactly the same way for decades, with a heavy plate of cornmeal cakes. But you've probably heard the myth about his wooden teeth, which were actually a horrifying concoction of human teeth. But those problems didn't stop him from enjoying his favorite breakfast, hoe cakes. It was a simple cornmeal patty, fried in a pan. But Washington didn't eat them like a normal human. He made them swimming in butter with high-quality honey. Why? Because the mushy texture was one of the few things his teeth could actually handle. Washington was a man of extreme discipline on the battlefield, but at the breakfast table, he was a honey-obsessed carb loader. His cook, Hercules, would prepare these every single morning at Mount Vernon. Hard cider, John Adams. He is a man who was famous for buzziness. Adams didn't start his day with a latte. He started it with a full tankard of hard cider, and he didn't just do this once in a while. He did it every single morning for his entire adult life. In the 18th century, water was often a gamble with your life, crawling with bacteria. And the hard cider is way better than water because the alcohol content made it sterile, while the apples provided a massive dose of polyphenols and vitamin C. Alcohol was the safe alternative. Adams believed that the fermented apple juice was the secret to his constitution and health. It's a miracle Adams lived to be 90 years old. That was almost statistically impossible in 1826. For Adams, hard cider was the primary source of hydration that allowed him to outlive almost every other founding father. Macaroni and cheese. Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was the ultimate foodie long before Instagram existed. During his time as a diplomat in France, he became obsessed with European delicacies. While most Americans were eating mush and salt pork, Jefferson was smuggling a macaroni machine back to Virginia. In 1802, he did something radical. He served pie with the noodles, what we now call macaroni and cheese, at a high society state dinner. The guests were shocked. They had never seen pasta before, and some thought it was an exotic French trick. But Jefferson wasn't just showing off. He was obsessed with the perfect noodle. He even drew detailed blueprints of pasta extruders. He loved it so much that he'd pair it with high-end Parmesan cheese, which he also had imported at great expense. Ice cream. James Madison. Madison's favorite food was ice cream, but in the early 1800s, ice cream wasn't just a dessert. It was a miracle. To serve ice cream in the humid heat of a DC summer, you had to be incredibly wealthy. You needed a deep ice house lined with straw and ice hauled from frozen rivers in the winter. Madison's wife, Dolly, became the face of this obsession, famously serving oyster-flavored ice cream at White House functions. Yes, you heard that right, oyster ice cream. While James was busy being father of the Constitution, he was also enjoying the sheer luxury of frozen dairy. It was a way of telling foreign dignitaries, "We are so advanced that we can keep cream frozen in a swamp." It was equivalent of owning a private jet right now. Spoon bread. James Monroe. Now we are moving into the era of good feelings. With James Monroe, we find a president who wanted his food to feel as smooth as fog. Monroe's was absolute mad on spoon bread. Now, don't let the name fool you. This isn't just soggy bread you eat with a spoon. It is a hybrid of Southern tradition and the airy French soufflé techniques Monroe admired during his time in Paris. The chemistry of a Monroe-style spoon bread is highly specific. Cornmeal is scalded with boiling milk to gelatinize the starches, creating a smooth, porridge-like base. Then, beaten egg whites are folded in to provide lift. The result is a trembling, light-as-air dish that must be eaten immediately with a spoon because it's far too delicate to hold in your hand. For Monroe, it represented the refined yet rustic identity of the early American Republic. Fresh fruit. John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams was all about discipline. Adams was the fitness nut of the 19th century. This is a man who famously went for skinny dipping sessions in the Potomac River at 5 a.m. to fuel his intense lifestyle and his even more intense diary writing. JQA was obsessed with fresh fruit. This might sound normal to us, but in the 1820s, having a constant supply of high-quality, unpreserved fruit was a major logistical challenge. He had a particular weakness for pears and apples, which he grew in his own orchards. He viewed fruit as a clean, intellectual fuel, a stark contrast to his father John Adams, who preferred starting the day with a pint of fermented cider. JQA was the original clean eater. He believed a clear gut led to a clear mind, which he needed to navigate the corrupt bargain that got him into office. He was basically the first president to treat his body like a Giga Chad. Giant cheese. Andrew Jackson. Jackson was one of the most disgusting president ever, but nothing defines his presidency quite like his love for cheese. Specifically, a giant, terrifying block of it. In 1835, a dairy farmer from New York sent Jackson a gift, a 1,400-pound wheel of cheddar cheese. It was 4 feet in diameter and 2 feet thick. Instead of throwing it away or giving it to a food bank, Jackson let it sit in the White House entrance hall for 2 years. As his term ended, he held a public reception and told the citizens of Washington to come and eat it. Thousands of people descended on the White House, hacking away at the giant wheel with pocket knives and hands. The smell was so potent it allegedly could be detected 2 blocks away, and the grease from the cheese seeped into the White House carpets and curtains so deeply that the next president, Martin Van Buren, had to spend weeks scrubbing the place to make it smell good again. Boar's Head. Martin Van Buren, known as the Little Magician, his culinary preference was a primary reason for his political downfall, his love for boar's head. This wasn't the deli meat you see today. It was a medieval-style centerpiece, often served with the tusks intact, the eyes replaced with olives, and the entire head glazed in a shimmering, translucent reduction of aspic jelly. Technically, boar's head was the ultimate symbol of European aristocratic power, a high-fat, high-status meat that signaled Van Buren's obsession with elegance. While the rest of the country was struggling with a massive economic depression known as the Panic of 1837, Van Buren was holding court with French-style service and expensive imported wines. That's why his rivals launched the famous Gold Spoon attack, claiming he spent thousands of taxpayer dollars on exotic delicacies and silver platters. William Henry Harrison, squirrel stew. William Henry Harrison's favorite food was the squirrel stew, also known as burgoo. Technically, squirrel meat is extremely lean and dense in protein, but it requires hours of simmering to break down the tough muscle fibers. Harrison, who was actually born into one of the wealthiest Virginia families, used this dish to perform a massive class reversal. During the 1840 campaign, he hosted log cabin rallies where enormous iron cauldrons of squirrel stew were served to thousands of voters. It was the ultimate branding tool. It convinced the public that Harrison was a rugged, simple woodsman from the Ohio wilderness who understood the struggles of the common man. The strategy worked perfectly, leading to a landslide victory. However, the irony is tragic. Harrison spent his entire campaign eating survival food to prove his strength, but he died just 31 days into his term. Whether it was pneumonia or the contaminated White House water, plum pudding. John Tyler. When Harrison died, John Tyler took over, and he brought a very traditional, almost stubborn appetite to the White House. His favorite, plum pudding. This wasn't the soft, jiggly pudding we think of today. It was a dense, cake-like Victorian dessert filled with dried fruits, spices, and sweet, raw beef fat. It was a heavy, old-world dish that reflected Tyler's political stance. He was a man who stood his ground so firmly that his own party kicked him out while he was still president. Tyler didn't care about trends or frontier optics. He wanted the rich, boozy, fruit-filled comfort of a classic plum pudding. Corn pone. James K. Polk was perhaps the most intense workaholic to ever sit in the Oval Office. He promised to serve only one term, accomplish 4 massive goals, like seizing half of Mexico and settling the Oregon Territory, and then leave. He did exactly that, but it took a toll. He had no time for founding foodie luxuries. His favorite was corn pone, a simple, dense, unleavened cornmeal bread baked in ashes or a heavy skillet. It was the fuel of a man on a mission. No yeast, no fluff, just pure, hard-baked energy. Polk worked himself to death, dying just 3 months after leaving office, and his plain diet of corn pone and ham reflected a man who viewed eating as a mechanical necessity rather than a pleasure. Cherries and milk. We end this part with a cautionary tale. Zachary Taylor, a war hero known as Old Rough and Ready, had a fatal weakness for cherries and milk. On July 4, 1850, at a celebration for the Washington Monument, Taylor gorged himself on a massive amount of raw cherries and iced milk. In the 1850s, milk wasn't pasteurized, and DC water was a literal swamp of bacteria. The combination triggered a violent case of gastroenteritis. Within 5 days, the indestructible general was dead. The man survived the Mexican-American War only to be taken down by a snack. It's the ultimate proof that in the mid-19th century, the White House menu was more dangerous than a battlefield. What you think about it, huh? But there is 30 more president left. So comment for part 2 and subscribe so you won't miss it.